I came to St Kilda as Development Officer in 1983, so our main brief in those days, we had zones, we had the VFL as it was in those days, we had junior lists. If you were under 15 and a half, you needed to be on a club's junior list of 50 players. Otherwise, if somebody found a player that was in, say, our zone and they liked him, they could actually sign him.
But in those days you had country zones and metropolitan zones, and so it was as simple as assembling all of the best players from 15 onwards and putting them into scholarship squads and sorting through them with the very best then invited into the under-19s with a chance to progress. So it was a simple system. You virtually farmed your area. It was a matter of observation, watching matches around Victoria or interstate in the search for talent. There weren't in-depth interviews, there weren't psychological appraisals, there certainly weren't fitness testing of any type. It was just natural talent that caught the eye of the experienced scout that would get an invitation for a player to come to a then VFL club. And in 1986, the AFL brought in the draft for the first time. It was the year before the West Coast Eagles and the Brisbane Lions joined the competition, and the spread of talent had to be done far more fairly than under the zoning system that tended to favour some clubs that had very productive zones.
Very few clubs had full-time recruiting people in those days. So the first draft, gee whiz, it was almost like who we're going to draft. It was almost names in a hat, not quite as bad as that. But we drafted some players on hearsay. You know, he's the best under-21 player in the Western Border League, that sort of thing. So it was very hit and miss, and there were a lot of blokes that didn't make the grade who were drafted at that time. We struggled to find vision in those early days of the draft. VHS came in and we would try and get ABC tapes from Perth and from Adelaide. There was very little vision of kids that we get today, under 18 players. You'd almost get no vision, so you had to depend on when you've seen them and what you saw and put it in your memory bank.
6 years after the draft was formed, clubs were starting to inquire a lot more into the athletic prowess of the potential players in the pool. As a result of that, the first ever draft combine was held out at Waverley Park in 1993. And from its humble beginnings, where the sprints were even run on the concrete through the turnstiles to get a consistent surface, the draft combine has grown.
From the physical point of view, the game is constantly evolving, so it's important for the recruiting staff to be up to date with the modern game, but then also looking at where the game's going.
We have repeat sprints, we have 3K time trials, we have beat tests, we have athletic testing that we could never have envisaged 20 years ago would be occurring as clubs try and fine-tune their draft selection order.
You know, football character is becoming so important in terms of players that are competitive and resilient, and they're going to hit setbacks along the way, so players that are high in optimism and keep bouncing back. So the mental side of it's critical to our evaluation. We speak to a number of people about the individual players themselves, so we speak to their coaches, we speak to their football managers, we speak to their player managers, we speak to their schools, we speak to their teammates, we speak to the parents and parents of their teammates. So you're covering a lot of bases. I think technology is impacting every form of business, and I think the recruiting, or the football industry and recruiting is no different, so I think utilising the technology where you can. I think from a recruiting team point of view, there's so much information coming through and data, so I think the teams with good processes and systems in place and able to utilise the technology.
Every weekend, more than 60 games are taped by the AFL. They're then time-coded so that by a Tuesday of any given week, a club can access the game file of any player around Australia.
Like if we want to go back and watch, say, Billy Smith from the Oakley Chargers in his last 5 games, everything that he's been statistically recorded as having done, kicks, handballs, tackles, all of that stuff, we can put on a highlight tape, or you can click on his name and you can watch his game in 2 minutes.
It's probably important for the young players, parents and coaches and footy clubs that they have a pretty clear understanding of where the player sits in the draft pool, because I think with more exposure becomes more disappointed boys for the guys that do actually miss out on getting selected. I've noticed some players that have been exposed to the media over the past couple of weeks that we probably wouldn't draft. So I'm sure that's similar to some clubs. So there will be some fallout. I think it's a great thing for the game that the exposure's there, but we also need to manage the downside, I think.
You've got to be very careful as a recruiter that you never promise a fellow that you're going to draft him. You know, you might interview 60 or 70 players, and it may well be that 20 of those guys that you interview to cover all the tracks may not get drafted. That's a possibility.
The fact that there's more money coming into the game, you know, so there's a greater investment in the young players means you know, you've just got to get your decisions correct.
There's a lot of pressure on recruiters to make sure that they get it as right as they possibly can. There's no excuse for taking shortcuts, so it's a very exhausting process, and I'd like to think that we do it pretty well.